Hi everyone, welcome back to a new episode of Diagnosedan. Today we're working on a 2018 Peugeot Expert, and in Europe this is a very popular van, and it's also sold as a Toyota Proace, a Citroen Dispatch, a Fiat Scudo, an Opel or a Vauxhall Vivaro. Anyway, a very popular van. Now the customer complaint on this Peugeot is that the check engine light is on and the Adblue light is flashing. There's also a warning in the instrument cluster stating that the van won't start again in an X amount of kilometers. So let's see if we can diagnose this one together. Now, as always, let's start out by confirming the customer complaint. Let's start up the engine, and indeed we have got a flashing Adblue light, and we have got a spanner, we've got a warning in the dash stating we've got an engine malfunction and we need to get it fixed, and we have got an emission malfunction and the car won't start again within 950 kilometers. We also got a check engine light, so I guess that's customer complaint confirmed. Now initially this van came in with two separate issues, one of them being is that the AC wasn't working. Now I addressed that problem yesterday and I had to replace the AC compressor. Now unfortunately a failed AC compressor is quite a common issue on these vehicles. Now today we're going to address the Adblue issue. The owner told me that besides all the warnings in the dash, there are no drivability issues. The van drives absolutely perfectly. Now the countdown in the dash did make the owner nervous, and he doesn't want to drive the vehicle anymore until we got that issue resolved. Now that warning isn't just a warning. This van is not going to restart when that counter hits 0. The countdown has to do with legislation. The Adblue system is part of the NOx reduction system, and when that system isn't working properly, this van no longer meets emission standards. And that means this van basically is no longer road legal, and it actually won't start again if the counter hits 0. Now with a scan tool like this one, you can reset that counter and you'll get another 1,000 kilometers, but of course that is not a long-term solution. While I was talking on the background, I've been running a full diagnostic scan of the vehicle and I have created a report. Now when we take a look at that report, we can see there are quite some fault codes stored, but most of them are intermittent. And when we look at the engine ECU, there are 3 fault codes stored, 2 of them intermittent and 1 is permanent, and that's the fault code I'm actually interested in. And that's the P... Hold on. Oh, this is so annoying. I got this scan tool with a very big screen and I can't even read it anymore. It's the P20E8, pressure of the urea fluid pressure too low. That P20E8 code is actually quite a common fault code on these vehicles. But before we dive into diagnosing that fault code, I quickly want to run you through the Adblue system. Now we're underneath the vehicle, and over here we can see the main fuel tank, the diesel tank, and next to that diesel tank we can find the Adblue reservoir or Adblue tank, and over here we can see a filler neck. Now inside that Adblue tank there's stuff like an Adblue pump, a level sensor, pressure sensor, and a heater element. But what the Adblue pump does is it pumps the Adblue fluid towards the Adblue injector. The Adblue makes its way from the tank to the Adblue injector through this Adblue line. Now when that Adblue injector opens electrically, it will spray a fine mist of Adblue into the hot exhaust system. Now when you spray a very fine mist of Adblue into a very, very hot exhaust, it will immediately evaporate and form ammonia. That ammonia is then mixed with the exhaust gases through a mixer plate, which is located over here, before it makes its way into the SCR catalyst. Inside the SCR catalyst, a chemical reaction takes place which converts the harmful NOx into less harmful stuff like nitrogen and water. Now when we take a closer look at this damper or exhaust system, we can see that the SCR catalyst is in front of this damper, and the backside is actually the DPF, because we can see the pressure differential hoses over here. Now behind that whole system we've got a NOx sensor which measures the amount of NOx that is left in the exhaust after the whole process took place, and it determines whether the process was successful or whether it was not. When the NOx sensor determines that too much NOx is leaving the tailpipe, it usually sets a P20E8 code. Now, the P20E8 code is an SCR CAT efficiency code, and that basically means that the process was not successful and it didn't successfully remove enough NOx. Now, although this is also a very common code, this is not the code we are chasing today. Today we are chasing the P20E8 code, and that has to do with the Adblue pressure. Now, I guess you can imagine if there's not enough pressure in the Adblue system, not enough or no Adblue at all will be injected into the exhaust system. Now, the fault code we have got is exactly for the Adblue pressure. Now, inside that Adblue tank is a pressure sensor that measures the pressure inside the entire Adblue system, from the tank all the way up until the injector. If we don't have enough pressure in the Adblue system, this can mean two things, or actually three. One, we ran out of Adblue, which we're going to check, but I checked and we didn't. Two, the pump is not supplying enough pressure. Or three, somewhere we have got a leak. Now, if we have a leak in the Adblue system, it's usually going to leak in one place, and that's a leaking injector, unless the car was in an accident. I mean, anything can happen, but the most common place for an Adblue system to leak is through the injector. Now, before we do anything else, just because it's so simple, I'm going to remove the injector to see if the injector is leaking. I quickly removed the Adblue injector just because it's so super easy. It's only one clamp holding it down, and it probably only took me 30 seconds. Now, the great thing about finding Adblue leaks is that it's super easy. Whenever Adblue comes in contact with the atmosphere, it forms these white crystals. Now, if this injector had been leaking, you would see evidence of white crystals surrounding it. You would see white crystals in the exhaust. Now, I did take a borescope and took a peek in the exhaust. I didn't find any evidence of a leaking injector, although we did get a great view of that mixer plate I mentioned earlier. Now, if an injector is leaking really badly, you would even see Adblue coming out of the tailpipe, but in this case the tailpipe is totally clean. Now, it doesn't look we're leaking Adblue anywhere, so it might just be a case of not building enough pressure. So in the next step, I want to take a look at the data pit for the Adblue pressure to see what pressure reading we're actually having. In the next step, I want to find out what that in-tank pressure sensor is actually reading. So apparently, the pressure is too low, but I want to know how low. So we're going to take a look at the data pit for the Adblue pressure with the scan tool. Now, if you're going to perform this test, there are some things you need to keep in mind. First of all, the engine needs to be running. If the engine is not running, the system is not pressurized. Another thing is, the system needs to be at operating temperature. We're not there quite yet, but we will be soon. If the system is not at operating temperature, no Adblue is going to be injected and the system won't pressurize. Another thing is, on some models, I don't know for this one specific, a fault code might prevent the system from becoming active. So just to be sure, I cleared the fault codes, and that's why we don't have the check engine light in the dash right now. The system has reached operating temperature, so let's take a look at that Adblue pressure data pit. Let's select the data pit and let's graph it. Now, as you can see, we are reading a steady 4 bar. The data pit was showing us that the pressure was 4 bar. Now, is that too high, too low? Is it perfect? You tell me, but we actually need a little bit more information to be able to determine this. Now, what if I tell you that that 4 bar actually doesn't tell us anything? What if I tell you that on this particular system, it shows 4 bars, even if there's no pressure at all? This specific system only shows values above 4 bar. Everything below 4 bar will just be shown as 4 bar. How do I know? Because we wrote a bulletin about it. Now, when we select this vehicle in DDTSB and enter the fault code we have got, the P20E8, you can see we get multiple hits. When we take a look at the first bulletin that comes up, it states Adblue indicator starts flashing, that's one of our symptoms, and exhaust is white inside, which is not one of our symptoms. So this is not the bulletin we are looking for. Now let's open it anyway. We can see this is the bulletin for the leaking injector. When that injector leaks, we are losing pressure in the Adblue system. When we take a look at the second bulletin that comes up, it states urea indicator on with fault message no start in X kilometers. Now this is exactly what we are experiencing. And one or more pressure related fault code stored like the P20E8. Sounds familiar? Let's open the bulletin because I think this is the bulletin we are looking for. When we open it, we get a 3-page bulletin packed with all the information and all you need to know to properly diagnose this problem. The bulletin tells us that the possible solution to our problem is to replace the Adblue tank. But we will never tell you to replace something without properly testing it first. So in the bulletin we can read that the proper pressure should be between 5 and 6 bars. It also tells us that anything below 4 bars just shows up as 4 bar. That is very important information and hard to come by. It also tells us when the system is pressurized and we shut it down, it shouldn't drop more than 0.2 of a bar within 15 minutes. Now these are all tests we can do before condemning that Adblue tank. Now in my career I've seen this fault code many times, and 99 out of 100 times it's either a leaking injector or it's a failed pressure pump inside that Adblue reservoir. Now unfortunately that pump is not a separate part. You need to buy the entire reservoir, and depending on the model that can cost between 1,000 and 2,000 euros. It's really expensive. Now to condemn that pump we should measure the pressure at the injector, which later in this video we probably will do. But before I touch anything, I want to test a theory. I've changed many of these tanks and I always feel sorry for the customer because the tanks are so ridiculously expensive. Now there is a theory on the internet that the reasons for these pumps to fail is crystallization. When you only have a small layer of Adblue in the tank and don't fill it up regularly, on a hot day that little layer of Adblue might start to crystallize and block the filter and the pump inside the tank. Now that might lead to permanent damage because the pump starts running dry, but there are quite a few people on the internet that state that if you flush the tank with a decrystallization agent, everything comes back to life and everything is fine again. Now that is the theory I want to test in this video. Now I've got this product called Crystal Clean and Protect, and it's not a sponsor, it just happens to be the brand my supplier has standing on its shelf. It could be any product as long as it claims to do the same thing, which is dissolve crystals in the Adblue system. Now this product was made as a preventative product to add to the Adblue tank every now and then to prevent crystallization. But there are some people on the internet that say if you flush the tank with this product, it actually restores the pressure of the pump because it's blocked with crystals. When you look at the filler neck of the Adblue tank, you see a lot of crystallization. Now of course there's going to be some crystallization inside the tank as well. I just don't know how much, because I've never tested the theory. But the theory kind of makes sense, and it makes more sense after I talked to the customer, because the customer told me that all the problems started after parking the van with a low Adblue level on a hot parking place for 3 days, then filling it up, and then after a short drive, all the lights on the dash started appearing. Now if this experiment works, that would be great, because one of these bottles is about 10 euros, and about 2 of them to give it a fair fighting chance. And I asked the customer, and I asked him, do you want to give it a shot for 20 bucks or do you want the 1,500 euro tank straight away? And he told me the 1,500 euro tank is a very good idea, but the 20 buck shot is actually a better idea. So I don't know if it's going to work. Maybe we end up replacing the tank anyway. But what I want to do is I want to drain the Adblue tank. I want to fill it up with fresh Adblue fluid, then add the chemical and use the scan tool to activate the pump and flush the system. made a mistake, and I'm not going to cut the mistake out of this video because there's something we can all learn from it. During this diagnosis, I made an assumption. Now, making assumptions while doing diagnostic work is not something I would recommend, although I just did it myself. I drained the system, I filled it up with the decrystallization product, I filled it up with some new Adblue, and I was ready to flush the system. Now, during the diagnosis, I assumed we would have low pressure, but there would be some pressure. Now, when I was ready to flush the system, I energized the pump using the scan tool, but nothing happened. And that means we don't have any pressure at all, so I can't flush the system, and I cannot perform this test. Now, I was really looking forward to the results of these tests, but unfortunately we cannot do it because the pump isn't running, I can't flush it. Now, the upside is we have to dig a little bit deeper, and that means more diagnostics. I tried to energize the pump with the scan tool, and unfortunately it didn't work. I tried to bang and hit the pump to get the pump running again, but no luck either. Now, as you can see with the tank installed, there's not a whole lot we can do because all the interesting bits are actually inside the tank. There's a connector up there, it's kind of hard to reach. Now, it would probably take me 15 minutes to remove this tank and to take a closer look on the workbench. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to remove the tank and hopefully we can find out what's wrong with that pump. I lowered the tank, didn't even take me 15 minutes, more like 5 minutes or so. It's really easy, only 3 bolts holding it down and some hoses with quick connectors, really easy. Now with the tank lowered, we can see there's only one connector. Now all this is power, ground, and communication wires. Now, do I think it's necessary to check those? I don't think so. We can still communicate with the tank unit. I mean, the pressure sensor is in there and it's reporting a low pressure fault. So the problem must be inside the tank. So let's open it up and let's see if we can find anything wrong. The tank is on the workbench and I opened the lid, only a few screws, torque screws holding it down, very easy to open. And we're gonna take a look at that in a minute. Now, I do have to tell you that this video was not shot on one day. The first day I couldn't finish it. I had things to do elsewhere. And this is actually the second day I'm working on the vehicle, but today I do have to finish it because it's a company car, they need it back. So just in case we cannot repair the old tank, I ordered a new tank from the dealership. Now, although this is a tank from the dealership, it's actually a rebuilt tank, and hopefully if we need to replace it, that will save the customer some money. Let's take a closer look at the Adblue tank. Immediately we can see it's a lot more than just a reservoir, and that's probably why it's relatively expensive. Now, there are some things we can and some things we can't see. What we can see is a level sensor and a heater element that are further down in the tank, and it can be reached without damaging it. Now, we can see the wiring go down there. Now, over here we can see the pickup for the Adblue pump, and down there there's a filter that, if we have to believe the internet, gets clogged. Now, I tried to remove it, but at this point I can't remove it without damaging it, so for now we're leaving it be. Now, this is the Adblue pump we couldn't get to work while it was still installed in the vehicle. Now, to be honest, it doesn't look very impressive, and it's about the same size as a washer fluid pump. Now, behind that pump we've got a shutoff valve. Now, this shutoff valve has to open to allow the Adblue to flow from the reservoir into the accumulator. Now the accumulator is what keeps the system at a constant pressure between 5 and 6 bars. Inside the accumulator there is a piston that is spring loaded. Now when the pump starts pumping and the shutter valve opens, the pump can now fill the accumulator. Now when the accumulator is filled, the pump stops pumping and the shutter valve closes. We now have got a pressurized vessel. On one side we've got the injector, which is closed, and on the other side we've got the shutter valve. So now we've got a sealed system and the spring is keeping the pressure at 6 bars. Now in theory this should keep pressure indefinitely, but service data says that the pressure should stay at 6 bar for at least 3 minutes. Now every time the injector opens, the accumulator loses some of the Adblue, and eventually the pressure inside this vessel will reach a pressure lower than 5 bars, and then the pump kicks in again and the shutter valve opens until it's filled again. This means the pump isn't running constantly, but it's shutting off and on to keep the accumulator filled. Now this is why service data tells us that anything between 5 and 6 bars of pressure is perfect. 6 bars means a fully filled accumulator, 5 bars being the lower limit when the pump has to kick in again. Now when we look at the side over here, we can see a 3-wire pressure sensor right there built into the accumulator. Now keep in mind that if you have pressure at the injector, this doesn't mean the pump is running, but this means the accumulator is still filled with Adblue. Now if you'd like to learn even more about this assembly, we've got a nice document set up for you in Diagnosedan Tsb. Now, we have to keep in mind when we energized the pump with the scan tool, we were not energizing it directly. We were communicating with the circuit board and asking the circuit board to turn on the pump. So this means that either the pump is not working or the circuit board is not energizing it. I made this little test setup to individually test all the components of this system. I hooked up a positive and a negative wire to the shutter valve so I can manually open and close it. Also hooked up a positive and negative wire to the pump, and both the positives are connected together and then connected to a battery, and the negatives are also connected together, and when I supply a ground over here, the pump should start running and the shutter valve should open. Now I hooked up a line and made my little own reservoir filled with water. So this is now the pickup, and this line from the accumulator is normally connected to the injector, and this is now hooked up to the same little reservoir. So let's see what happens when I energize the pump and open up that shutter valve. Now, as you can see, the pump was working, but the big question is, can it supply enough pressure? So what I did is I made a makeshift connector to this supply line that normally goes to the injector, hooked up a pressure gauge and hooked it up to my tablet. Now in the next step, we're going to energize the pump to see what pressure that pump can actually reach. Not only were we able to reach 6.2 bars, but we're currently also holding 6 bars. Now this means our shutter valve is working, because if it was open, we would have leaked back into our little reservoir over here. So this test confirms that there's nothing wrong with our pump, nothing wrong with the shutter valve, and our accumulator is calibrated at exactly 6 bars. Now that we know that pump should be able to build pressure, we're going to try one more time to energize it with the scan tool. But this time we've got the reservoir open, so we can keep a close eye on the pump itself, and we can actually feel if it's trying to do anything at all. Now again, to energize the pump, the car or the van in this case needs to be at operating temperature. So it's warmed up, it's running right now, so let me try to energize the pump. but it isn't doing anything at all. As you can see, we weren't able to get the pump running while hooked up to the vehicle, activating it with the scan tool. Now in the next step, I hooked up the new tank to the vehicle just by the connector, and we're going to activate it again using the scan tool. Now these tanks do come pre-filled with a little bit of Adblue, so there should be enough for us to see it dripping out of this hose I attached to the supply line, which is going to drip into that little reservoir. Now obviously I'm not going to open this one because it's new and I don't want to void warranty. Now as you can see, we could energize the Adblue pump with the new tank installed, but we couldn't get it to work with the old tank hooked up to the vehicle, even though there was nothing wrong with the pump itself. Every time we commanded the Adblue tank to energize the pump, it didn't do it, and that means there's something wrong with the circuit board inside that Adblue tank. Now the customer really wants his van back, and it needs to be reliable, so I decided to replace the tank with a new one or a refurbished one. Now when we look at DTSB, it tells us that whenever we replace that Adblue tank, it doesn't need to be programmed, and that's a good thing, but we do need to perform a reset or a reinitialization. Now it really depends on the scan tool you're using, but on my Topdon it's very conveniently called replacement of the reservoir of the pump module. Now what this function basically does is it resets the counters, it pressurizes the system, and it bleeds the system of air by opening the injector so it's ready for action again. So the new tank is installed. I've done the reinitialization, I've checked for leaks. The car is warmed up. Remember, it needs to be warmed up for the pressure to build. It's warmed up now, it's running, so let's check the Adblue pressure. And as you can see right now, we are back at a healthy 5.8 bars. Now, as you could see, our Adblue pressure returned to a healthy value again. The van is now fixed and it can finally return to its owner. Now, as regards to the product we were about to test in this video, although I don't think our pump at any point was seized or clogged up with crystals, and although I really would like to check that filter, I would have to cut that tank open, and there's a deposit on the tank. It needs to be returned, so I don't want to do that. But if you think about it, the product actually makes sense. Even when I was filling up the Adblue tank, I saw some of the Adblue crystals falling into the tank. You really can't avoid crystallization inside that tank. So I'm definitely going to recommend my customers to use a similar product on a regular basis. If you're diagnosing a P20E8 code, like we were diagnosing in this video, but if your pump is still delivering pressure, but it's too low, I would definitely recommend to give it a shot. If it doesn't work, you probably have to replace that Adblue tank anyway. Another thing we've learned is that these tanks probably fail in more than one way, so it might or might not solve your problem. Now, another thing we have learned from this video is that you should never make assumptions when diagnosing vehicles. Diagnosis should be evidence-based and not based upon assumptions, or you will be wasting a lot of time, just like I did in this video. Now, my final message before we go to the bloopers, and I promise you, in this episode there were a lot, is that if you work in a European workshop or you own a European workshop and your workshop is not subscribed to DTSB yet, do yourself a favor and get your subscription right away. I will promise you, you will save so much time. I know how many workshops are struggling with fault codes like the P20E8, like we diagnosed today, and thousands of fault codes like it. Now, with the right information, they're so easy to solve. And DTSB makes it as easy as possible. Just select the vehicle, enter the fault code or symptom, and we will show you a bulletin if the fault you're working on is a common fault for that model. Now, it isn't general information, it is information based on the specific vehicle you're working on. Now, I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe to my channel, and when you hit the little bell, you will get a notification each time I upload a new video. And remember, diagnose then, fixed it again. See you next time, guys. Now, other than those warnings, place the AC compressor thing down. It's quite a common issue on these. So yesterday, I addressed that problem. Has been successful by determining of AdBlue into the hot exhaust. Now, when the fine mist of AdBlue, whenever AdBlue is exposed to the elements, it forms these white Christmas. Now, if this injector had been leaking, you would see white Christmas. Damn it! Engine needs to be running. If the engine is not running, the system is not up. In the next step, I drained the tank. I filled it up with the Whoa. Oops, we ran out of water. But we do need to perform a reset or a But we do need to perform a reset or a But we do need to perform a reset, or we do need a Whenever we replace the tank, we don't need to program it, which is a good thing. But we do need to perform a reset or a It doesn't need to be programmed, but we do need to perform a reset or a Now, as regards to the product, now, as you can see that AdBlue pressure returned to a Now, as you can see that AdBlue pressure returned to a healthy value again. My final message before we go to the bloopers, and I think there were a lot in this episode, is if you're working in a European